A German shepherd leads a search team deep into the snowy forest. But what they discover, hidden beneath the frozen ground, changes everything. They thought it was just another rescue mission, but when they uncover a buried military bunker and meet the mysterious veteran inside, a shocking series of events unfolds that nobody could have predicted. Who is this man? What's his connection to the dog? And why has he been living off the grid for over 40 years? Before we get into this incredible story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like stories about amazing discoveries and faithful dogs, don't forget to subscribe. Alisa's boots crunched through the fresh snow as she made her final rounds at the Mountain View Animal Shelter. The bitter January wind whipped through the gaps in her jacket, making her pull it tighter around herself. Most of the dogs were already settled in for the night, but a commotion from the back kennels caught her attention. Max, their newest arrival, was pacing restlessly in his enclosure, his dark eyes fixed on the tree line beyond the shelter's fence. "Hey, buddy," Alisa called softly, approaching the agitated German shepherd. "What's got you so worked up?" The dog's ears twitched at her voice, but his gaze remained locked on the forest. They'd found Max 3 days ago, wandering along the mountain road that led to their small Colorado town. No collar, no chip, but clearly well-trained. Something about him had struck Alisa as unusual from the start. The way he carried himself, his intense focus, how he seemed to be watching and waiting rather than settling in like most strays. The moon cast long shadows across the snow-covered ground as Alisa checked Max's kennel door one last time. The forecast predicted another storm, rolling in overnight, and she wanted to make sure all the animals were secure. But just as she turned to head inside, Max let out a sharp bark that echoed through the quiet night. Alisa spun around, startled by the urgency in his voice. The German shepherd stood rigid, his entire body tense as he stared into the darkness beyond the fence. "Max, what is it?" Alisa moved closer, trying to see what had caught his attention. The dog's behavior was becoming more agitated by the second. He paced the length of his kennel, whining and pawing at the gate, his eyes never leaving the forest. Something was wrong. In her 15 years of working with rescue animals, Alisa had learned to trust a dog's instincts. Making a quick decision, Alisa unlocked Max's kennel. The moment the door swung open, the German shepherd bolted toward the fence. But instead of trying to escape, he stopped and looked back at her, barking insistently. Alisa recognized that behavior. She'd seen it in search and rescue dogs during training exercises. Max wasn't running away. He was trying to show her something. "Hold on," Alisa called, hurrying back to the shelter's office. Her hands trembled slightly as she grabbed her emergency pack. Flashlight, first aid kit, radio, and heavy-duty gloves. She'd done enough mountain rescue work to know you never followed a lead without proper preparation. As she shouldered the pack, she radioed the local ranger station. "This is Alisa Martinez at Mountain View Shelter. I've got a situation here. One of our rescue dogs is showing strong alert behavior toward the West Forest. I'm going to investigate," the radio crackled, with static before a familiar voice responded. "Copy that, Alisa. This is Ranger's Station. Be advised we've got a storm system moving in fast. Give us your coordinates and we'll send backup." Alisa quickly relayed her position, then hurried back outside where Max waited impatiently by the fence gate. The moment she opened it, Max took off into the forest, but he kept pausing to make sure she was following. The beam of Alisa's flashlight cut through the darkness, catching Max's reflective eyes as he led her deeper into the trees. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and Alisa could smell snow in the air. They needed to move quickly before the storm. Yet Max moved with purpose, navigating the rough terrain with remarkable precision. This was no ordinary stray, Alisa realized. His movements were too calculated, too mission-focused. They'd covered almost a mile when Max suddenly stopped, his nose working the air. The forest had grown denser, the old-growth pines blocking out most of the moonlight. Alisa's flashlight beam caught something unusual, a pattern in the snow. That didn't look natural. As she moved closer, her breath caught in her throat. Partially buried under years of forest debris and fresh snow, she could make out what looked like old metal doors set into the ground. They were heavy-duty, military-grade, and definitely shouldn't have been there. The area was supposed to be empty national forest land. Max began pawing at the snow around the doors, whining urgently. Alisa's radio crackled to life, making her jump. "Alisa, do you copy? Storm's moving in faster than expected. You need to head back now." She keyed the radio with shaking fingers. "I've found something. Some kind of underground structure. Max led me right to it." The German shepherd's behavior was becoming more frantic by the second. He barked sharply, then began digging with renewed intensity at a spot near the doors. Alisa's flashlight beam revealed something that made her heart skip. Fresh tracks in the snow, partially filled in, but still visible. Someone had been here recently. The wind was picking up now, driving tiny ice crystals into Alisa's face as she tried to make sense of what she was seeing. The tracks led to a smaller side panel she hadn't noticed at first. As she brushed away the snow, she found a keypad. Ancient technology, probably decades old, but when she shone her light directly on it, she could see it was still operational. A tiny red light blinked steadily in the corner. Max's whining had taken on a different tone, not urgent now, but almost mournful. He pressed his nose against the metal doors, then looked at Alisa with an intelligence that sent chills down her spine. This wasn't a coincidence. The dog hadn't just stumbled upon this place. He'd led her here deliberately. Alisa's radio crackled again, but this time it was mostly static. The storm was interfering with the signal. She caught fragments of words. "Or immediate evacuation, dangerous conditions, return to..." The rest was lost in a burst of white noise. The wind was howling through the trees now, and the temperature had plummeted. They needed shelter, and fast. Looking at the bunker doors, Alisa made a decision that would change everything. "Okay, Max," she said, her voice nearly lost in the wind. "You brought me here for a reason. Let's find out why." She examined the keypad more closely, noting the wear patterns on certain numbers. 4 digits, probably a code that had been used repeatedly over the years. Her fingers hovered over the keys as she considered the risks. Breaking into what was clearly a military installation, active or abandoned, could cost her her job, or worse. But Max's insistence, the fresh tracks in the snow, and her own instincts told her this was important. Someone might need help. Taking a deep breath, Alisa punched in the most obvious combination based on the worn keys. Nothing happened. She tried again with a different sequence. Still nothing. Max watched her intently, then suddenly stood up and pressed his paw against the metal door in a very deliberate motion. 4 distinct taps. Alisa's eyes widened as she realized what the dog was trying to tell her. Could it really be that simple? Her fingers trembled as she input the number of taps, 4397. For a moment, nothing happened. Then she heard it, a faint mechanical whir coming from deep within the structure. The red light on the keypad turned green, and with a hiss of releasing pressure, the small side door cracked open. Max didn't hesitate. He squeezed through the gap the moment it was wide enough, disappearing into the darkness beyond. Alisa took one last look at the worsening storm behind her, then clicked on her high-beam flashlight and followed the German Shepherd into the unknown. The door sealed shut behind them with a heavy thunk that echoed through the metal corridor. The air inside was stale, but not unbreathable. Alisa's flashlight revealed a long hallway stretching ahead, its walls lined with faded military markings and peeling paint. But what caught her attention were the signs of recent activity. Scuff marks on the floor, a cleared path through the dust, and most notably, a string of dim emergency lights that cast a weak glow every few meters. Someone was living down here. Max trotted ahead confidently, his nails clicking on the metal floor. He clearly knew exactly where he was going. Alisa followed, her mind racing with questions. Why had this dog appeared near their shelter? How did he know the code to this place? And most importantly, who or what would they find at the end of this corridor? The storm raged on above ground, but down here, in this buried piece of military history, Alisa was about to discover a truth that would challenge everything she thought she knew about fate, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds between humans and their faithful companions. And it all began with a German shepherd who refused to give up on his mission. The underground corridor seemed to stretch endlessly ahead, broken only by the rhythmic placement of emergency lights that cast eerie shadows on the metal walls. Alisa's flashlight beam bounced off various military insignias and faded warning signs, their messages barely legible after decades of neglect. Max moved with unwavering confidence, stopping occasionally to ensure she was still following. As they ventured deeper into the facility, Alisa noticed subtle changes in their surroundings. The dust on the floor grew thinner, and some areas showed clear signs of recent maintenance. Old junction boxes had been carefully repaired, and newer wiring ran alongside the original conduits. Someone had been working to keep this place operational. A distant humming sound grew steadily louder as they approached what appeared to be a major intersection. Max paused at the junction, his ears twitching at some sound Alisa couldn't detect. The dog turned left without hesitation, leading her down a wider corridor that bore markings suggesting it led to a central command area. Alisa's training as a rescue worker warred with her growing sense of unease. She'd entered the bunker seeking shelter from the storm, but each step took them further into what was clearly an operational facility. Her flashlight caught something that made her pause, a security camera mounted in the corner. Unlike the aging infrastructure around it, this device was modern, its tiny LED glowing steadily in the darkness. Max's sudden bark echoed through the corridor, making Alisa jump. The German Shepherd had stopped in front of a heavy blast door, its surface marked with faded yellow and black stripes. Unlike the other doors they'd passed, this one showed signs of regular use. The floor in front of it was completely clear of dust, and the control panel beside it hummed with power. Before Alisa could decide what to do, a voice crackled through, a hidden speaker, causing her to stumble backward in surprise. "I've been watching you since you entered." The voice was male, elderly but strong, with an edge of military authority that made Alisa stand straighter instinctively. "Max wasn't supposed to bring anyone here, but I suppose the storm didn't leave him much choice." Alisa's mind raced as she processed this information. The speaker knew Max by name, confirming her suspicions about the dog's mysterious appearance at the shelter. "I'm Alisa Martinez from Mountain View Animal Shelter," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "We found Max 3 days ago. He led me here tonight." There was a long pause, filled only by the distant hum of machinery. Finally, the voice spoke again, softer this time. "Max has always been good at making the right decisions, even when they go against orders." The blast door released with a pneumatic hiss, slowly swinging open to reveal a surprisingly well-lit room beyond. Alisa hesitated at the threshold, but Max trotted through confidently, his tail wagging slightly, for the first time since she'd met him. Taking a deep breath, Alisa followed the dog into what appeared to be a command center. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying everything from weather data to security feeds of the surrounding forest. The technology was a strange mix of old and new. Cutting-edge screens sat alongside Cold War-era equipment that still whirred and clicked. In the center of it all, seated in a worn leather chair, was an elderly man in faded military fatigues. His silver hair was cut in a precise military style, and despite his age, his posture remained ramrod straight. Max padded over to him immediately, receiving a gentle pat on the head. "Welcome to Station Echo," the man said, his weathered face creasing into a slight smile. "I'm Colonel James Harrison, though I haven't used that title in a very long time." Alisa stood rooted to the spot, struggling to process the scene before her. The Colonel's next words caught her completely off guard. "I owe you an apology. When Max didn't return from his supply run, I feared the worst. Finding out he'd been picked up by your shelter was a relief, but it also presented a problem. I couldn't exactly walk in and claim him without raising questions." "Supply run," Alisa found her voice. "You sent him into town deliberately?" The Colonel nodded, reaching down to scratch behind Max's ears. "Max has been my lifeline to the outside world for the past 5 years. Once a month, he makes the journey to town with a special harness. My contact there provides him with essential supplies and sends him back. It's worked perfectly until now." Alisa's professional instincts kicked in as she noticed details about the Colonel's appearance. The slight tremor in his hands, the pallor of his skin. "Sir, are you all right? Do you need medical assistance?" The old soldier's laugh was surprisingly warm. "I'm fine, Miss Martinez, just getting old. That's actually why Max broke protocol this time. He knows I've been having trouble with the generators lately. This storm would have knocked out my power, and at my age, I can't afford to lose heat down here." Moving to one of the monitoring stations, the Colonel brought up a weather map. The storm system looked massive, far worse than the forecast had predicted. "Max knew I needed help," he continued, "and he chose you. He's always been remarkable at reading people." Alisa watched as the German Shepherd moved between them, his intelligent eyes seeming to follow their conversation. "But why are you here?" Alisa asked, gesturing to the elaborate setup around them. "What is all this?" The Colonel's expression grew serious. "That's a long story, and one I haven't told anyone in over 40 years. But I suppose since you're here..." He pressed a button, and a hidden door slid open, revealing a small living quarters. "We should sit down. It's going to be a long night with this storm anyway." The living area was sparse but comfortable, with military efficiency evident in every detail. As they settled into worn but serviceable chairs, Max positioned himself between them, alert and attentive. The Colonel's hands shook slightly as he poured 2 cups of coffee from an ancient percolator. "I was stationed here in 1983, he began, his voice taking on a distant quality. Station Echo was part of a network of emergency command centers built during the height of the Cold War. When the war ended, most of these facilities were decommissioned. But Echo had a different purpose, one that never made it into any official records." Alisa accepted the coffee, noting how the Colonel's eyes constantly darted to the various monitors visible through the doorway. His next words made her nearly drop her cup. "We were developing something here, something that could have changed everything. A program so classified that when they shut it down, they didn't just bury the research, they buried everyone connected to it. Or at least, they tried to." Max's ears perked up at the change in the Colonel's tone. The old soldier reached down to pat the dog reassuringly before continuing. "I was the only one who saw it coming, the only one who got out. I've been here ever since, protecting what's left of the program, and more importantly, protecting its results." He gestured to Max, and Alisa's confusion must have shown on her face. "Max isn't just any German shepherd," the Colonel explained, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "He's the culmination of decades of research, the last of his kind, a perfect blend of canine loyalty and enhanced intelligence. He can understand complex commands, solve problems, even operate basic machinery. But more importantly, he can think for himself, make independent decisions when necessary." Alisa looked at Max with new eyes, remembering how he'd shown her the keypad code, how deliberately he'd led her here. The dog met her gaze steadily, and she could swear she saw something in those dark eyes that went far beyond normal animal intelligence. "But that's impossible," she whispered, even as her mind processed all the unusual behaviors she'd observed. The Colonel's laugh held a touch of bitterness. "Impossible. In 1983, we achieved things that would still be considered impossible today, but someone decided our research was too dangerous, too unpredictable. They ordered everything destroyed, the facility, the research, and all the subjects. I couldn't let that happen, not to them, not after everything we'd achieved." A warning light began flashing on one of the monitors, and Max immediately rose, padding over to the command center. They followed, watching as the dog expertly pressed a series of buttons with his nose, bringing up detailed system diagnostics. Alisa stood speechless as Max identified and rerouted power to compensate for a storm-damaged solar array. "He's been keeping me alive down here," the Colonel said softly, pride evident in his voice. "When my health started failing, he took on more and more responsibilities. He can operate most of the basic systems, maintain security protocols, even handle emergency procedures. But he knew this storm would be too much for him to manage alone. That's why he brought you here." Alisa's mind was reeling with questions, but before she could voice any of them, a loud alarm began blaring through the facility. Max's posture changed instantly, his entire body tensing as he stared at one of the security monitors. The Colonel moved with surprising speed to the main console, his fingers flying over the keyboards. "We've got company," he announced grimly. "Multiple vehicles approaching from the north access road." Alisa's heart raced as she watched multiple sets of headlights cutting through the snowy darkness on the security feed. The vehicles were military-style Humvees, their heavy-duty tires easily navigating the treacherous mountain roads despite the worsening storm. Colonel Harrison's fingers flew across the keyboards with practiced efficiency, bringing up additional camera angles and sensor readings. 6 vehicles, 12 personnel minimum, he muttered, more to himself than to Alisa. They're using the old access road. That means they know exactly where they're going. Max stood rigid beside the colonel, his eyes fixed on the monitors, ears forward and alert. The dog's entire demeanor had changed. Gone was the gentle intelligence she'd witnessed moments ago, replaced by an intensity that reminded Alisa of military working dogs she'd seen in action. "We need to move now," Colonel Harrison announced, his voice taking on that sharp command tone again. He pressed a series of buttons, and Alisa watched as systems throughout the facility began shutting down in a carefully orchestrated sequence. They've been looking for this place for decades. The storm must have interfered with our security measures enough for them to detect something. Alisa found her voice as she watched the approaching vehicles get closer on the monitors. "Who are they? Military? Police?" The colonel's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Neither and both. They're part of a special division that officially doesn't exist. The same ones who tried to shut us down 40 years ago." He turned to Max, speaking in a clear, precise tone. "Implementation Protocol Echo 7, confirm." Max barked once, sharp and clear, then immediately moved to a section of the command center Alisa hadn't noticed before. The dog pressed his paw against a scanner, and a hidden panel slid open, revealing a narrow corridor bathed in red emergency lighting. Alisa watched in amazement as Max began systematically removing hard drives and other components, placing them carefully in a specially designed harness he retrieved from a locker. "Ms. Martinez," the colonel's voice drew her attention back. "You have a choice to make. What happens next will involve actions of questionable legality. You can take the main corridor back up. There's enough time for you to get out before they arrive. Return to your shelter. Forget what you've seen here. Or you can help us ensure 40 years of sacrifice doesn't end tonight." A loud rumble of thunder shook the facility, and several monitors showed power fluctuations from the storm. On the security feeds, the vehicles were now less than 2 miles away. Alisa thought about everything she'd witnessed in the past hour. The incredible technology, Max's extraordinary abilities, the colonel's decades-long vigil. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. "What do you need me to do?" she asked firmly. The colonel's face softened with relief for just a moment before returning to its determined expression. "Max knows the evacuation protocols, but I'm not as young as I used to be. We need to reach the emergency exit on the far side of the facility. 2 kilometers through maintenance tunnels, then up to a concealed cabin where I have a vehicle waiting." They moved with urgent purpose, following Max through the red-lit corridor. The colonel quickly explained as they walked. "The facility's automated systems will initiate a cascading shutdown. By the time they breach the main entrance, most of the evidence will be destroyed or encrypted beyond recovery. But we need to protect the core research data. And more importantly, we need to protect Max." Alisa noticed the colonel was already breathing heavily from their pace. His earlier assurance about his health had clearly been an understatement. They reached a junction where several corridors merged, and Max stopped suddenly, his ears twitching. A moment later, Alisa heard it. Two, a distant boom that resonated through the facility's structure. "They're ahead of schedule," the colonel muttered, checking his watch. "They must have brought demolition equipment." He turned to Max, who was already adjusting his route, leading them down a different corridor. "They'll be looking for a direct approach to the command center. We'll take the maintenance tunnels. Harder to navigate, but more escape options. The new route took them through narrower passages filled with pipes and conduits. The emergency lighting was sparser here, and Alisa had to rely more on her flashlight. She could hear more booms now, accompanied by the occasional tremor through the facility's structure. "Those charges are too big," the colonel said grimly. "They're not trying to preserve anything this time. They're going to bury it all." Max led them through a series of quick turns, moving with certainty despite the increasingly maze-like layout. The dog occasionally stopped to press his paw against hidden panels, opening secret passages or sealing doors behind them. Alisa marveled at his capabilities, even as her concern for their situation grew. The sounds of intrusion were getting louder. They emerged into what appeared to be an old storage area. Dust-covered crates lined the walls, their faded labels suggesting long-forgotten military supplies. The colonel leaned against one of the crates, his breathing labored. Need a moment," he gasped. Alisa moved to check his pulse, her rescue training kicking in. It was rapid and irregular. Max whined softly, pressing against the colonel's leg. The old soldier managed a weak smile, patting the dog's head. "I'm all right, boy, just not as spry as I used to be." But his pale complexion and shaking hands told a different story. Alisa did a quick medical assessment, noting with growing concern how the colonel's left arm was trembling. A massive explosion rocked the facility, much closer this time. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and the emergency lights flickered ominously. Max's head snapped toward the sound, a low growl building in his throat. The colonel straightened up with visible effort. "We need to keep moving." The auxiliary. "Power won't last much longer." They had covered perhaps another 100 meters when disaster struck. The colonel stumbled, clutching his chest. Alisa barely managed to catch him before he hit the ground. His face was gray, his breathing shallow and rapid. "Heart," he managed to gasp. "Should have expected this." Max pressed close, whining urgently, his eyes moving between the colonel and the corridor behind them. Alisa quickly lowered the colonel to the floor, her mind racing through her emergency medical training. The symptoms were clear. He was having a cardiac event, possibly a heart attack. Without proper medical equipment, in the middle of an underground facility being systematically demolished, their options were severely limited. The colonel seemed to read her thoughts. "Ms. Martinez," he wheezed, "you need to go. Take Max. The data, the research, it has to survive." Another explosion shook the tunnel, closer still. Max stood over them protectively, his ears swiveling to track the approaching danger. The colonel fumbled with a pocket on his fatigues, pulling out a small device that looked like a modified key fob. "This will open the escape vehicle." He pressed it into Alisa's hand. "The coordinates are pre-programmed. Max knows where to go." His voice was getting weaker. "Please, 40 years. Can't let it end here." Alisa felt tears stinging her eyes as she realized what the colonel was asking. Leave him behind, save his life's work, protect the extraordinary dog who had led her into this incredible situation. Max understood too. The dog pressed his nose against the colonel's face, whining softly. The old soldier wrapped his arms around the shepherd's neck in a final embrace. "You know what to do, boy. Take care of her. Complete the mission." Max's tail drooped, but his posture remained alert and focused. He had his orders. The sound of boots on metal echoed through the tunnels, accompanied by tactical radio chatter. They were running out of time. The colonel reached into another pocket and pulled out a small pill bottle. "Can't let them find." Me alive. Too many secrets. Alisa started to protest, but the look in his eyes stopped her. This was a soldier's choice, made with full understanding of the consequences. "Go!" he commanded, his voice finding some of its former strength. "That's an order, both of you." Max stood at attention, every inch the military dog, though his eyes never left the colonel's face. Alisa felt tears running down her cheeks as she gathered her pack and the vital research materials. The colonel gave them one last nod, then turned his attention to a small control panel on the wall. "I'll seal the blast doors. Buy you some time." Alisa's last glimpse of Colonel James Harrison showed him sitting upright against the wall, his face set with determined dignity as the heavy blast doors slid closed between them. Max pressed against her leg, urging her forward. The dog's training was evident. Despite his clear emotional attachment to the colonel, he understood the importance of their mission. They moved quickly through the darkening tunnels, the sounds of pursuit now muffled by the blast doors, but still approaching. Max's enhanced intelligence showed in every decision, every turn he led them through. He wasn't just following an escape route, he was actively evading their pursuers, using his knowledge of the facility to stay one step ahead. The maintenance tunnels grew noticeably colder as they moved away from the facility's core systems. Alisa's flashlight beam caught clouds of her breath in the frigid air, and the metal floor had developed a thin coating of frost. Max moved with silent efficiency, leading them through a maze of service corridors that seemed to spiral ever upward. The dog's harness, loaded with crucial hard drives and research data, made no sound as he navigated the narrow passages. Behind them, muffled explosions continued to shake the facility's structure. Each tremor brought down more dust and debris. And from the ceiling, and Alisa noticed hairline cracks beginning to form in some of the walls. The colonel's sacrifice had bought them time, but the facility was literally being torn apart around them. The thought of the old soldier's final moments sent a fresh wave of grief through her chest. Max suddenly stopped, his ears swiveling toward a sound Alisa couldn't hear. The dog's body language changed instantly. He crouched lower, pressing against the wall, and looked back at her with an unmistakable message to do the same. Alisa killed her flashlight and flattened herself against the cold metal wall. Moments later, she heard what had alerted Max, voices echoing through the ventilation system. Heat signatures moving north-northwest through the maintenance. "Level," a professionally crisp voice reported. "Two distinct patterns, one matches K9. Alisa's heart hammered in her chest as she realized they were being tracked. The facility's own systems were being used against them. Max's ears twitched at every word, his enhanced intelligence clearly processing the threat. Without warning, Max moved again, but this time toward what appeared to be a solid wall. Alisa watched in amazement as the dog pressed his paw against a seemingly random panel, causing a hidden door to slide open with a soft hiss. The passage beyond was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through. Clearly, an emergency maintenance shaft never meant for regular use. They had only gone about 50 meters when Alisa heard more voices, this time from the tunnel they'd just left. The hidden door had sealed seamlessly behind them, but she knew it wouldn't take their pursuers long to figure out where they'd gone. These people had been hunting the colonel's secrets for 40 years. They'd know every trick, every possible escape route. The maintenance shaft ended at a vertical ladder well. Max approached it with purpose, activating another hidden panel that caused a small platform to extend from the wall. Alisa watched in amazement as the dog stepped onto the platform, which began to rise smoothly. An elevator system designed specifically for his use. She quickly grabbed the ladder and began climbing alongside him, trying to match his pace. They emerged into what appeared to be an old storage level. The air here was different. Alisa could smell pine needles and fresh snow. They must be close to the surface. Max led her to a heavy steel door marked with faded radiation warnings. Unlike the high-tech systems below, this door had a simple mechanical lock. The dog nudged Alisa's pack, and she remembered the key fob the colonel had given her. The lock disengaged with a solid clunk, and together they pushed the door open. A blast of winter air hit them, carrying stinging ice particles from the ongoing storm. They were in some kind of loading bay, long abandoned based on the rusted equipment scattered around. Through the swirling snow, Alisa could make out the shapes of trees. The forest was only about 30 meters away. A thunderous explosion from below made them both stumble. The facility was coming apart faster now. Max pressed against Alisa's leg, urging her toward a narrow path that led into the trees. They had only covered about half the distance when brilliant spotlights suddenly illuminated the loading bay. A voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "Stop where you are! You are interfering with a classified military operation." Alisa's heart nearly stopped, but Max was already moving. The dog nudged her toward a different direction than the path, seemingly into deeper snow. She understood why a moment later when bullets struck the ground where they would have been running. Max had anticipated the attack pattern. The storm worked in their favor now, the heavy snow reducing visibility and making accurate targeting nearly impossible. They pushed through snowdrifts that reached Alisa's knees, Max somehow finding solid footing beneath the white expanse. The dog's enhanced capabilities were evident in every movement. He wasn't just escaping, he was actively creating a difficult trail to follow, doubling back and crossing their own tracks in ways that would confuse any pursuit. More shots rang out behind them, but they were blind shots now, their pursuers firing at shadows in the storm. Alisa caught glimpses of flashlight beams sweeping the tree line as they moved deeper into the forest. Max led her on a winding route that seemed random, but gradually took them higher up the mountain slope. The bitter wind cut through her jacket, but they couldn't stop. The cold was their ally now, helping to mask their heat signatures from any thermal tracking equipment. After what felt like hours of trudging through deep snow, Max's pace finally slowed. The dog led them to a fallen tree whose massive trunk provided some shelter from the worst of the wind. Alisa collapsed against it, her legs trembling from exhaustion. She checked her watch. They'd been moving for nearly 2 hours since leaving the colonel. The thought of him brought fresh pain, but she pushed it aside. They needed to focus on survival now. Max shook the snow from his fur and pressed close to her, sharing his warmth. Despite everything they'd been through, the dog's attention never wavered. He remained alert, his ears constantly moving to track any unusual sounds through the storm. Alisa used the brief rest to check the research materials in Max's harness. Everything was secure and dry, protected by the specially designed carrier. The storm was beginning to ease slightly, the wind dropping from a howl to a moan. In the relative quiet, Alisa heard something that made her blood run cold. The distant sound of helicopter rotors. Max heard it too. The dog was on his feet instantly, tugging gently but insistently at her sleeve. They needed to move again, but this time Max led them toward a rocky outcropping. As they got closer, Alisa realized what she was seeing. a cleverly concealed entrance to a small cave, its opening masked by natural rock formations and strategically placed brush. Max nosed aside some branches, revealing a space just large enough for them to squeeze through. Inside, the cave extended back about 10 meters before ending in a smooth rock wall. But Max wasn't done surprising her. The dog moved to a specific spot along the wall and pressed his paw against what looked like a natural depression in the rock. A soft click echoed through the cave, and a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Alisa's flashlight showed a concrete floor and metal-reinforced walls. This was another part of the facility's escape network, but one that looked much older than the main complex. They moved quickly through the passage, which sloped steadily upward. After about 500 meters, they emerged into what appeared to be an old ranger cabin. The building looked abandoned from the outside, with boarded windows and weathered walls. But inside was a different story. Solar-powered emergency lights cast a soft glow over well-maintained equipment and supplies. Max moved immediately to a tarp-covered shape in the corner. Alisa helped him pull the cover off, revealing a rugged, all-terrain vehicle. Everything about it was designed for stealth. Matte black paint, oversized snow tires, and what looked like sophisticated electronic countermeasures built into the dashboard. The colonel had planned for every contingency. A quick check showed the vehicle was fully fueled and maintained, with chains already mounted on the tires. Alisa found a set of heavy winter clothes in exactly her size, stored in a locker. Another sign of the colonel's meticulous planning. As she changed into the warmer gear, Max busied himself transferring the research materials from his harness to a specially designed compartment in the vehicle. The sound of helicopters was getting closer, their searchlights visible even through the thick forest canopy. Alisa knew they needed to move quickly, but something made her hesitate. She looked at Max, who sat watching her with those incredibly intelligent eyes. "Do you know where we're supposed to go?" she asked, feeling slightly foolish talking to a dog, even one as extraordinary as Max. In response, Max jumped into the vehicle's passenger seat and pressed his paw against the GPS unit mounted on the dashboard. The screen came to life, showing a pre-programmed route that led deep into the wilderness. Alisa smiled despite their dire situation. The colonel had thought of everything, and Max knew exactly how to access the information they needed. Alisa eased the all-terrain vehicle onto a narrow Forest Service road, its specialized tires gripping the snow-covered ground with remarkable efficiency. The colonel's vehicle was a masterpiece of engineering, whisper-quiet despite its power, with advanced suspension that smoothed out the roughest terrain. Max sat alert in the passenger seat, his attention divided between the GPS display and their surroundings. The pre-programmed route took them deeper into the wilderness, following old logging roads and game trails that didn't appear on any standard maps. Occasionally, Max would tap the GPS screen with his paw, adjusting their course to account for changes in the terrain that the satellite data couldn't show. The dog's understanding of their situation continued to amaze Alisa. This wasn't just trained behavior, but genuine problem-solving ability. The storm was intensifying again, thick snow reducing visibility to mere meters. But the vehicle's advanced sensor systems cut through the weather, projecting a detailed terrain map onto a heads-up display on the windshield. Alisa could see the helicopter signatures circling the area they'd left behind, their search patterns growing wider as they tried to pick up their trail. They crossed a frozen stream, the vehicle's weight carefully distributed to prevent breaking through the ice. Max suddenly tensed, his ears swiveling toward something behind them. Moments later, Alisa heard it too, the distant rumble of engines. Their pursuers had figured out their escape route and were mobilizing ground vehicles to follow. "They're not giving up easily, are they?" Alisa muttered. Max responded with a soft whine, then reached over with his paw to activate a panel of switches on the dashboard. The vehicle's external lights dimmed to almost nothing, and a quiet hum indicated some kind of electronic countermeasure system coming online. The dog's actions were deliberate and precise. He clearly understood not just what each system did, but when to use it. The GPS guided them onto an even narrower trail that wound up a steep hillside. Alisa's hands gripped the wheel tightly. As they navigated switchback after switchback, the vehicle's specialized tires somehow maintaining traction on the treacherous surface. The pursuing engines grew fainter as the weather and terrain worked in their favor. Dawn was breaking somewhere above the storm clouds when they finally reached what appeared to be their first destination. Through the swirling snow, Alisa could make out the shape of an old mining facility, its structures half buried in decades of winter storms. Max directed her to a specific building that looked like it was about to collapse. But as they got closer, Alisa could see it was another clever disguise. The seeming decay was carefully crafted camouflage. When Max pressed his paw against what looked like a rusted scanner, a section of the ground began to move. A hidden vehicle bay opened beneath them, the ramp's hydraulics operating smoothly despite the extreme cold. Alisa drove down into the concealed facility, watching in the rearview mirror as the entrance sealed seamlessly behind them. The underground garage was small but well-equipped, with maintenance tools and spare parts organized with military precision. As soon as they parked, Max jumped out and moved to a control panel, activating systems throughout the facility. Lights came on, revealing a compact living space beyond the garage. Clearly another of the Colonel's safe houses. Alisa began unloading the research materials, while Max worked through what seemed to be a standard security checklist, checking various monitors and systems. The dog's movements were efficient, but showed signs of fatigue. Even his enhanced capabilities had limits, and they'd been pushing hard for hours. "We should rest," Alisa said, noting how Max's ears drooped slightly despite his alert posture. "They can't track us through this storm, and we both need to recover." The dog looked at her for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. His intelligence still startled her, even after everything she'd seen. Max led her to a small room equipped with basic sleeping quarters, then took up a guard position near the door. Alisa wanted to examine the research materials they'd rescued to understand what made them so valuable that people would kill to protect or obtain them. But exhaustion hit her like a physical wave as soon as she sat down on the narrow bed. Her last conscious thought was of the Colonel, hoping his sacrifice would prove worth it. She awoke to Max's gentle but insistent nudging. The dog's posture was tense, his ears focused on something she couldn't hear. Alisa checked her watch. She'd been asleep for just over 4 hours. Moving quietly, she followed Max to the control room, where multiple displays showed the area around their hideout. At first, she couldn't see what had alerted him, but then she noticed the pattern. Systematic sweeps of the mountainside by ground teams. "They're not giving up," Alisa whispered. Max shook his head, an eerily human gesture, and brought up a terrain map on one of the screens. Their pursuers were working in a grid pattern, methodically checking every possible shelter in the area. It would take time in this weather, but eventually they would find this place. Max moved to another console and began entering commands with his paw. Alisa watched in amazement as the dog accessed what appeared to be a network of hidden cameras and sensors throughout the region. The technology was incredibly sophisticated. She could see thermal imaging of the search teams, drone footage from above the storm clouds, and real-time satellite data. A red warning light began flashing on one of the displays. Max's attention snapped to it immediately, and Alisa felt her heart sink as she saw what had triggered the alert. Their pursuers had brought in specialized equipment, ground-penetrating radar mounted on all-terrain vehicles. They were no longer just searching the surface. They were looking for underground structures. The dog's actions became more urgent. He moved to a storage area and began gathering supplies, clearly preparing for another move. Alisa helped him load the research materials and additional equipment into backpacks designed for extreme conditions. She noticed Max was selecting very specific items: emergency rations, cold weather gear, and what looked like high-tech communication devices. A distant rumbling made them both freeze. At first, Alisa thought it was another storm front moving, but Max's reaction told her otherwise. The dog quickly brought up seismic data on one of the monitors. The reading confirmed her fears. Their pursuers were using controlled explosions to test for hollow spaces underground. "They're getting closer," Alisa said, her voice tight with tension. Max nodded again, then brought up a new map on the main screen. It showed a route leading higher into the mountains, away from any roads or marked trails. The dog pointed with his paw to a specific location, a tiny symbol that didn't appear on any standard map. Alisa studied the route, her experience with mountain rescue, giving her a good understanding of the challenges they'd face. The path would take them through some of the most rugged terrain in the region, areas that were nearly impassable in these weather conditions. But that was probably the point. Their pursuers would have to work much harder to follow them there. Max had clearly been trained for exactly this scenario. He moved through the facility with purpose, systematically shutting down systems and activating what appeared to be some kind of self-destruct sequence. Alisa noticed he was careful to set delayed timers. When this place went dark, it would look like a gradual power failure rather than a deliberate shutdown. The dog led her to what looked like a solid rock wall, revealing yet another hidden exit. This one was different from the others. A narrow tunnel that sloped steeply upward, with metal rungs embedded in the wall for climbing. The space was tight, clearly designed as a last resort escape route that their pursuers' vehicles and equipment couldn't follow. As they prepared to enter the tunnel, Alisa heard another explosion, closer this time. Max quickly sealed the main entrance to their hideout, then began climbing the metal rungs with surprising agility, despite his fully loaded pack. Alisa followed, trying not to think about how far they might have to climb or what waited for them. Above, the tunnel seemed endless, rising almost vertically in some places. The air grew noticeably thinner as they ascended, and the temperature dropped steadily. After what felt like hours of climbing, they emerged into a small cave high on the mountainside. The storm was still raging outside, but through brief breaks in the clouds, Alisa could see they were well above the tree line. The wind howled through the mountain peaks like a living thing, driving particles of ice and snow before it with brutal force. Alisa pulled her ski goggles tighter against her face, grateful for the specialized gear from the Colonel's cache. Beside her, Max navigated the treacherous terrain with remarkable sure-footedness, his enhanced capabilities evident in every calculated step through the deep snow. They were following a route that shouldn't have existed, a narrow ledge that wound its way through near vertical cliff faces, occasionally disappearing completely under snowdrifts, only to re-emerge dozens of meters later. Max led the way confidently, sometimes stopping to wait while Alisa carefully picked her path across particularly challenging sections. Through breaks in the storm, Alisa caught glimpses of the valley far below. Tiny lights moved methodically across the landscape, their pursuers continuing their systematic search despite the worsening weather. The height and conditions had forced the helicopters to turn back, but the ground teams seemed relentless in their determination. Max suddenly stopped, his body going rigid with attention. Alisa halted immediately, trusting the dog's enhanced senses. Through the howling wind, she heard what had alerted him, the distinctive crack of ice under pressure. They had reached a section of the path covered by a massive snow overhang, and it was becoming unstable. The dog turned to her, his eyes conveying a clear message of urgency. They needed to move, and quickly. Alisa followed Max's lead as he picked up the pace, choosing each step with incredible precision. The crack of breaking ice grew louder, accompanied by an ominous rumbling that seemed to come from inside the mountain itself. They were halfway across the dangerous section when it happened. A deafening boom echoed off the cliff faces as the snow overhang began to collapse. Max reacted instantly, lunging forward to grab Alisa's sleeve with his teeth, pulling her toward a shallow cave entrance she hadn't even noticed. They dove into the opening just as tons of snow and ice thundered past the entrance. Alisa's flashlight revealed they were in some kind of natural chimney in the rock, stretching both up and down into darkness. Max was already examining the walls, his attention focused on a particular section of rock. Using his paw, he brushed away years of accumulated ice, revealing another of the Colonel's hidden scanners. The rock wall slid aside silently, exposing a tunnel that looked much more sophisticated than their last escape route. Emergency lighting flickered to life as they entered, revealing a well-maintained passage that sloped gradually upward. The temperature was notably warmer here. Some kind of heating system was clearly still operational. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, Alisa began to notice strange markings on the walls. They weren't military symbols or standard warning signs, but complex mathematical equations and scientific formulas. Max seemed to pay special attention to these, occasionally stopping to examine particular sections. "These are part of the research, aren't they?" Alisa asked, studying a particularly complex formula that seemed to deal with advanced genetics. Max nodded, then used his paw to wipe away years of dust from a nearby panel, revealing more equations. Alisa's limited scientific knowledge was enough to recognize that this was groundbreaking work, theories and calculations that went far beyond current understanding. The tunnel opened into a small chamber that was clearly designed as an emergency shelter. Unlike the previous hideout, this one seemed more focused on research than survival. The walls were covered with more formulas and diagrams, and sophisticated laboratory equipment sat under protective covers. Max moved purposefully through the space, activating systems and bringing ancient computers back to life. The screens displayed data that Alisa couldn't begin to understand. Complex genetic sequences, neural mapping diagrams, and page after page of technical specifications. The dog accessed a specific terminal, pulling up what appeared to be video files. Alisa watched in amazement as decades-old footage began playing, showing a much younger Colonel Harrison working with a team of scientists. They were conducting experiments that seemed impossible, testing animals that displayed levels of intelligence far beyond normal capabilities. "This is where it all started," Alisa whispered, understanding dawning as she watched the footage. "This is where they created you." Max's ears twitched in acknowledgement as he continued accessing files, each one revealing more about the extraordinary program that had led to his existence. The research went far beyond simply enhancing animal intelligence. The scientists had discovered something fundamental about consciousness itself, finding ways to bridge the gap between human and animal cognition. But as Alisa watched more footage, she began to understand why some had wanted this research buried forever. A warning light on one of the monitors drew their attention. Max quickly brought up the security feeds, showing that their avalanche had only temporarily delayed their pursuers. Teams were already being redirected, using specialized equipment to search for hidden structures at this elevation. The dog's actions became more focused as he downloaded critical files onto portable drives. He seemed to be following a specific protocol, carefully selecting certain data while deliberately leaving other files untouched. Alisa helped him gather the materials, noting how some of the drives were marked with symbols that matched equations. On the walls, a distant rumbling made them both look up. Their pursuers had resumed their tactic of using controlled explosions to search for hidden chambers. Max quickly finished the download sequence and began shutting down systems. Unlike the previous hideout, he wasn't bothering to hide their presence. Here, they were too close to their final destination for that to matter. The dog led Alisa to what appeared to be a dead end, but by now she knew better. Max activated another hidden panel, revealing their next route, an elevator shaft that stretched up into darkness. The elevator itself was powered by an independent system, one that hummed to life as soon as they stepped inside. As they ascended, Alisa checked their position on a wall-mounted display. They were climbing higher than she thought possible, approaching the very peak of the mountain. The elevator finally stopped at what the display showed as the highest point of the entire facility. They stepped out into a chamber, unlike anything Alisa had seen before. The walls were made entirely of reinforced glass, offering a 360-degree view of the surrounding mountains. Through the swirling snow, she could see they were indeed at the summit. The chamber was filled with what looked like prototype equipment, experimental versions of the technology that had ultimately led to Max's enhanced capabilities. Max moved quickly to a central console, powering up systems that looked decades ahead of their time. Screens came to life, showing data feeds from around the world, news reports, scientific papers, and what appeared to be ongoing research projects, all somehow connected to the original program. The dog's attention was focused on a particular display that showed a countdown timer. Whatever they were here for, they had arrived just in time. Alisa watched as Max began a complex sequence of commands, accessing systems that seemed to be connected to facilities all over the globe. A mechanical whirring drew Alisa's attention to the center of the room, where a section of the floor was opening to reveal some kind of transmission array. Max worked quickly, connecting their recovered data drives to the system. The array hummed to life, its purpose still unclear to Alisa, but obviously crucial to their mission. The whole chamber suddenly shook as another explosion echoed through the mountain. Their pursuers were getting closer, the controlled detonations growing more powerful as they narrowed down their search area. Max remained focused on his task, but his ears constantly swiveled toward the sounds of approach. Alisa checked the security feeds, her heart racing as she saw multiple teams converging on their location. They had maybe 20 minutes before the search parties reached this level. She turned to Max, who was still working intently at the console. "Whatever we're doing here, we need to do it fast." The dog nodded without looking up, his paws flying over the controls with incredible precision. The transmission array was now fully extended, its components aligned with what looked like satellite positions. A progress bar on the main screen showed some kind of massive data transfer beginning. The array hummed with increasing intensity as data streamed through its systems, each drive's contents being transmitted to unknown locations around the globe. Alisa watched the progress bars with growing anxiety, acutely aware of the explosions that were growing closer by the minute. Max's attention was split between monitoring the transmission and tracking their pursuers' approach through the security feeds. A particularly violent blast shook the entire chamber, causing several screens to flicker ominously. Alisa steadied herself against a console, watching as fragments of ice fell from the reinforced glass ceiling. "They're getting closer," she warned, though Max's tense posture indicated he was well aware of their situation. The dog's paws moved across the controls with increased urgency, but he couldn't rush the transmission without risking data corruption. The main screen suddenly flashed red, indicating a system alert. Alisa leaned in to read the warning. The explosions had damaged one of the facility's main power conduits. They were now running on backup generators, but the strain of powering the transmission array was quickly depleting their remaining energy reserves. Max responded immediately, rerouting power from non-essential systems to maintain the data transfer. The chamber's temperature began to drop as the heating system was sacrificed, and several auxiliary monitors went dark. Through the frosting glass walls, Alisa could see more search teams converging on their location, their headlamps cutting through the swirling snow like predatory eyes. The transmission had reached 70% completion when another explosion rocked the facility, this one close enough to crack one of the reinforced windows. Warning klaxons began blaring throughout the chamber as multiple systems reported critical damage. Max worked frantically to compensate, but their options were running out as quickly as their power reserves. Alisa's attention was drawn to a particular security feed that showed a team setting up what looked like heavy cutting equipment near one of the facility's hidden entrances. They had found them. It would only be minutes before they breached the outer defenses. The dog noticed too, his ears flattening against his head as he calculated their remaining time against the transmission's progress. 80% complete. The first spark of cutting torches appeared on the security feed as the strike team began burning through the reinforced door. Max initiated another series of commands, and Alisa realized he was activating the facility's final defensive protocols. Blast doors began sliding shut throughout the lower levels, creating a maze of barriers that would slow their pursuers' advance. The chamber shook again, but this time it wasn't from an explosion. The entire peak of the mountain seemed to be vibrating, responding to some kind of resonance from the transmission array. Alisa watched in amazement as patterns of energy began dancing across the glass walls, creating an aurora-like display that pulsed in sync with the data transfer. 90%. The first blast door had fallen, and the security feeds showed teams moving efficiently through the facility's upper levels. They knew exactly what they were looking for now. Max's paws flew across the controls as he engaged every remaining security measure. Buying precious seconds for the transmission to complete, Alisa's heart nearly stopped as she saw what was on another monitor. A helicopter was approaching, somehow managing to fly despite the treacherous conditions. They had decided to risk a direct assault on the summit. Through the frosted glass, she could see its searchlight sweeping the peak, getting closer to their location with each pass. Max let out a low growl of frustration as another power conduit failed. The transmission slowed dramatically, the progress bar seemingly frozen at 95%. The dog made a series of quick adjustments, and Alisa realized with a shock what he was doing. Routing power from the facility's structural integrity systems to maintain the data transfer. The chamber's reinforcement began to groan under the strain of the mountain's weight as support systems went offline. Small cracks appeared in the ceiling, spreading like spider webs across the glass. They were literally sacrificing their shelter to complete the transmission. 98%. The helicopter was directly above them now, its downdraft creating a vortex in the swirling snow. Through the frosted glass, Alisa could see armed figures preparing to fast rope down to their location. The cutting teams had reached the upper levels, their torches visible through the gaps in the facility's compromised structure. Max's attention remained fixed on the transmission, but his ears tracked every sound of approach. Alisa could see the tension in his body as he fought his military training to stand and fight, knowing that completing this task was more important than any tactical response. 99%. The first rope dropped past their window as commandos began their descent. The cutting teams had reached the final door. The chamber's structure was failing, pieces of equipment crashing to the floor as the whole facility began to shift on its weakened foundation. A sudden flash of green light indicated the transmission's completion. Max immediately initiated a new sequence, one that caused every screen in the facility to begin systematically wiping its data. Alisa understood. They couldn't risk leaving any of the research for their pursuers to find. The dog turned to her, his intelligent eyes conveying a clear message. They needed to move now. Max led her to what looked like a maintenance shaft, quickly entering a code that caused a panel to slide open. Behind it was a narrow passage that seemed to lead down into the mountain's core. They had just entered the shaft when the chamber's defenses finally failed. Alisa heard the crash of breaking glass and the thud of boots hitting the floor above them. Shouts echoed through the facility as the strike teams converged on their location, only to find an empty room full of blank screens and failing equipment. The passage descended at a steep angle, forcing them to rely on handholds embedded in the wall. Max navigated the climb with surprising agility despite his four-legged nature, using the holds in a way that must have been specifically designed for his capabilities. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter as they moved deeper into the mountain's heart. After what felt like an eternity of climbing down, they emerged into a small cavern that contained one last surprise, a sleek escape pod, its design unlike anything Alisa had ever seen. Max quickly activated its systems, the pod's canopy sliding open with a soft hiss of hydraulics. As Alisa helped Max secure their remaining equipment in the pod's storage compartments, she noticed something about its design. The controls were specifically adapted for canine use, with paw-friendly interfaces and adjustable restraints that could accommodate a dog's body structure. This had been the Colonel's final contingency plan, a last resort escape vehicle for his extraordinary companion. The mountain shook again, but this time it was different, not from explosions or structural failure, but from some kind of deep resonance that seemed to emanate from the transmission array's final activity. Max's ears perked up at the sound, and his demeanor changed. Whatever signal they had sent out, it was having an effect that even he hadn't fully anticipated. They had just finished the pod's pre-launch sequence when Alisa heard voices echoing down the maintenance shaft. Their pursuers had found their escape route. Max quickly guided her through the pod's entry procedure, ensuring she was properly secured before taking his position at the controls. The pod systems came fully online, displaying a destination that had already been programmed into its navigation computer. Alisa noticed it wasn't coordinates, at least not any normal geographical coordinates she recognized. The numbers seemed to shift and change as she watched them, following some pattern she couldn't understand. A warning light flashed as the first team members emerged into the cavern, weapons raised, but they were too late. Max activated the launch sequence, and the pod's electromagnetic drive engaged with a high-pitched whine. The last thing Alisa saw before the canopy polarized was the look of frustration on their pursuers' faces as the pod shot into a tunnel that shouldn't have existed, carrying its passengers toward a destination that defied conventional understanding. The escape pod hurtled through a network of tunnels that seemed to defy physics, banking and turning at angles that should have been impossible without crushing its occupants. The advanced inertial dampeners kept Alisa and Max stable as their vessel accelerated to speeds she hadn't thought possible underground. The pod's displays showed their trajectory cutting through the mountain's core along paths that didn't appear on any geological survey. Alisa watched in amazement as Max operated the controls with practiced efficiency, his enhanced intelligence clearly familiar with this extraordinary mode of transport. The tunnel walls occasionally flickered with the same strange energy patterns they'd seen in the summit chamber, suggesting this entire escape system was somehow connected to the technology they'd been protecting. The pod's internal displays showed multiple pursuit vehicles attempting to follow their trajectory, but they were falling behind rapidly. The Colonel's final escape plan hadn't just been about physical distance. They were traveling through specially constructed passages that were already beginning to seal themselves behind the pod, making pursuit impossible. A sudden shift in the pod's momentum caused Alisa to grip her restraints tighter as they began ascending at an incredible angle. The main screen showed they were approaching what appeared to be some kind of underground terminus station. Max's paws danced across the controls, initiating what looked like a docking sequence. They emerged into a vast cavern that dwarfed anything Alisa had expected to find beneath the mountains. The space was filled with advanced technology that hummed with barely contained energy. Massive generators lined the walls, powering systems whose purpose she couldn't begin to guess. The pod settled onto a docking platform with a soft hiss of hydraulics. Max waited for the external sensors to confirm the atmosphere was stable before releasing the canopy. The air in the cavern was surprisingly fresh, circulated by hidden ventilation. Systems that had clearly been maintaining this facility for decades. As they stepped out of the pod, Alisa noticed something odd about the floor. It seemed to respond to their presence, subtle lighting patterns tracking their movement. The dog led her toward a central control station that dominated the chamber. Like everything else they'd encountered, it was designed to accommodate both human and canine operators. Max quickly began activating systems, bringing ancient screens to life with data that seemed to flow like water across their surfaces. One particular display caught Alisa's attention. It showed a global map with dozens of points of light pulsing in synchronized patterns. She realized these must be the destinations of their transmitted data, a network of hidden facilities, all receiving pieces of the kernel's research. The revolutionary knowledge they'd protected was being distributed so widely that it could never be completely suppressed again. Max's ears suddenly perked up, his attention drawn to a particular frequency of data streaming across one of the monitors. The dog's entire demeanor changed as he processed whatever information he was receiving. Alisa wished she could understand what he was seeing, but the complex patterns meant nothing to her human perception. A deep rumbling resonated through the chamber, but this time it wasn't from pursuit or destruction. The sound seemed to emanate from the facility itself, as if the entire structure was responding to some predetermined signal. Max's focus remained locked on the data stream, his enhanced mind clearly recognizing patterns that were invisible to normal consciousness. The floor beneath them began to vibrate with increasing intensity, and Alisa noticed the lighting patterns were changing, forming more complex geometries that spread across the entire chamber. The generators along the walls spun faster, their energy output climbing to levels that made the air itself feel charged with potential. Max finally turned to Alisa, his intelligent eyes conveying a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Whatever was happening, even he wasn't entirely sure of the outcome. The dog moved to a specific console and activated what appeared to be some kind of recording system. The screen filled with the colonel's face, decades younger, but bearing the same determined expression. Alisa remembered. "If you're seeing this," the recording began, "then Max has successfully protected and distributed our research. What we discovered here goes far beyond enhanced animal intelligence. We found something fundamental about the nature of consciousness itself, patterns that exist in all living minds, waiting to be awakened." The colonel's image flickered as the chamber's energy levels continued to rise. "The transmission you completed wasn't just about preserving data. It was about triggering a cascade effect in the network we built, activating dormant systems that have been waiting for decades. What happens next was always meant to be Max's choice." Alisa looked at the dog, who sat watching the recording with an unreadable expression. The colonel continued, "The facility you're in now contains our most advanced consciousness enhancement technology. Originally, we planned to use it to create more subjects like Max, but we discovered it had far greater potential. It can bridge the gap between different forms of awareness, creating connections that transcend normal biological limitations." The vibrations were reaching a crescendo now, the patterns on the floor and walls pulsing with almost blinding intensity. "Max," the colonel's recording said softly, "you've carried this burden alone for so long. Now you have a choice. The system is capable of sharing your enhanced consciousness with others of your kind, not just dogs, but any animals ready to take that step. You can remain unique, or you can help others achieve what we helped you become." The recording ended, leaving them in a chamber, humming with potential energy. Alisa looked at Max, understanding the weight of the decision before him. The dog sat perfectly still, his enhanced mind presumably processing implications that she could only imagine. The choice the colonel had left him was staggering: remain one of a kind, or potentially change the entire relationship between humans and animals forever. Max finally moved to the central console, his movements deliberate and precise. Alisa watched as he began entering commands, each keystroke potentially affecting the future of consciousness itself. The chamber's energy patterns responded to his inputs, the geometric designs growing more complex and interconnected. A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing a three-dimensional map of neural patterns that Alisa recognized from the research data. As Max continued his work, new connections began forming in the display, spreading outward like a growing web of awareness. The dog paused, looking back at Alisa with those incredibly intelligent eyes. She understood he was asking for her input, including her in this monumental decision. "Whatever you choose," she said softly, "I'll help you see it through." Max seemed to consider this for a moment, then turned back to the console with renewed purpose. The neural pattern display suddenly exploded with activity as Max initiated what appeared to be a broadcast sequence. The energy patterns in the chamber aligned themselves into new configurations, forming channels that pulsed with potential. Alisa realized she was witnessing the beginning of something unprecedented, a conscious choice to share rather than hoard evolutionary advancement. The cavern's energy systems pulsed with increasing intensity as Max's chosen sequence took effect. The holographic neural patterns expanded exponentially, each new connection representing potential pathways of enhanced consciousness spreading outward from their hidden facility. Alisa watched in awe as the display showed the signal radiating through the network they'd helped activate, reaching hidden receivers around the globe. First responses began appearing on the monitoring screens, other facilities coming online, dormant systems awakening after decades of waiting. Each new activation caused ripples in the neural pattern display, showing consciousness patterns beginning to shift and evolve. Max worked steadily at the controls, carefully monitoring and adjusting the broadcast's parameters to ensure stable transmission. A separate display showed environmental feedback from areas receiving the signal. Alisa gasped as she saw the first indicators of change. Animals near the broadcast points showing subtle but measurable increases in neural activity. The process was gentle, gradual, exactly as the Colonel's team had designed it. This wasn't forced evolution, but rather an invitation to greater awareness for those ready to receive it. Max's ears suddenly perked up, his attention drawn to a particular data stream. Alisa moved closer to see what had caught his interest. The screen showed real-time footage from various locations around the world: wildlife preserves, forests, even urban areas. Animals were responding to the signal in unexpected ways, displaying new patterns of behavior that suggested growing awareness. The chamber's systems continued to hum with energy as Max made minute adjustments to the broadcast. His enhanced intelligence was evident in every decision, carefully balancing the power and reach of the signal to prevent overwhelming less developed minds. This was delicate work, helping consciousness evolve without forcing change on those not ready for it. Alerts began appearing on multiple screens as their pursuers attempted to breach the facility's outer defenses. But the Colonel had built this place to last. Layers of security protocols and physical barriers kept them at bay while the broadcast continued. Max seemed unconcerned by their efforts, knowing they couldn't stop what had already begun. Alisa noticed something remarkable on one of the environmental monitors. Animals near the broadcast points weren't just showing increased neural activity. They were beginning to interact with each other in new ways. Species that normally ignored or avoided each other were showing signs of rudimentary communication. The boundaries between different types of consciousness were starting to blur. Max's work at the console became more focused as he initiated the second phase of the broadcast. The neural pattern display shifted, showing more complex connections forming as the signal adapted to each receiver's capacity for growth. Some patterns grew more quickly than others, but all showed steady progress toward higher awareness. A particularly strong security alert drew their attention. Their pursuers had brought in heavy equipment, attempting to cut through the facility's outer walls. Max calmly activated additional defense systems, buying them more time to complete the broadcast sequence. The Colonel had prepared for every contingency, building layer upon layer of protection into his final sanctuary. The chamber's energy patterns began shifting again, forming new configurations that pulsed with increasing complexity. Alisa realized the facility itself was evolving, its systems adapting to support the growing network of enhanced consciousness. What had started as a simple broadcast was becoming something more, a sustained bridge between different levels of awareness. Max's paws moved across the controls with renewed purpose as he initiated what appeared to be the final phase of the sequence. The neural pattern display exploded with activity, showing consciousness connections multiplying at an unprecedented rate. But there was nothing chaotic about the growth. Each new pattern was carefully structured, guided by the protocols Max had established. The environmental monitors showed the effects spreading further, reaching deeper into both wild and urban environments. Animals weren't just becoming more aware, they were beginning to understand their newfound consciousness, exploring their enhanced capabilities with surprising sophistication. The Colonel's decades-old dream of bridging the gap between different forms of awareness was becoming reality. Alisa checked the security feeds again, watching their pursuers' frustrated attempts to breach the facility. They must have realized by now that something unprecedented was happening, but they couldn't stop it. The signal was too widely distributed, the changes too far advanced. The evolution of consciousness had passed the point of no return. Max turned to Alisa, his intelligent eyes conveying a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation. The dog's posture suggested he was picking up something through his enhanced senses. Feedback from the growing network of awakened minds. His ears twitched constantly, tracking signals that human perception couldn't detect. The chamber's energy patterns shifted once more, settling into a stable configuration that would sustain the broadcast indefinitely. Max had done more than just share his enhanced consciousness. He had created a self-maintaining network that would continue to support and nurture growing awareness in compatible minds around the world. A new alert appeared on the main screen, showing multiple approaching vehicles. But these weren't their pursuers. The signatures were different, suggesting civilian transport. The environmental monitors provided the explanation. Humans around. The broadcast points were beginning to notice the changes in animal behavior. The first witnesses to this evolutionary leap were already documenting and sharing their observations. Max worked quickly to activate the facility's final protocols. Security systems reconfigured themselves, shifting from active defense to long-term camouflage. The outer barriers would remain impenetrable, but now they would also be virtually undetectable. This place needed to survive long enough for the changes to become irreversible. The neural pattern display had stabilized, showing a vast network of enhanced consciousness spreading steadily across the globe. Each point of light represented a mind awakening to new possibilities, joining a growing community of awareness that transcended species barriers. The kernel's research hadn't just created one enhanced intelligence, it had opened the door for countless others to follow. Alisa watched as Max made his final adjustments to the broadcast parameters. The dog's movements were precise, but relaxed now, confident in the success of their mission. They had not only preserved the kernel's work, but had fulfilled its ultimate purpose, sharing the gift of enhanced consciousness with others ready to receive it. The security feeds showed their pursuers finally retreating, perhaps realizing the futility of their efforts. Whatever they had hoped to contain was now beyond their reach, spreading through channels they couldn't detect or control. The evolution of consciousness would continue with or without their approval. Max led Alisa to a secondary control room she hadn't noticed before. This space was different from the main chamber, smaller, more focused on monitoring than broadcasting. The dog activated a series of displays that showed long-term tracking of the consciousness network's growth and development. This would be their new mission, watching over and protecting the expanding web of enhanced awareness. 6 months later, Alisa sat in the monitoring room of the mountain facility, watching the consciousness network continue to grow and evolve. The displays showed an ever-expanding web of enhanced awareness, spreading steadily across continents and species barriers. Max lay beside her, his attention divided between multiple data streams as he made subtle adjustments to the broadcast. Parameters. The world above had changed in ways that few understood, but everyone noticed. Reports flooded news networks daily about unprecedented animal behavior. Wolves leading rescuers to lost hikers, dolphins actively protecting endangered coral reefs, elephants organizing to guard against poachers. Each incident was a small ripple from the wave of consciousness enhancement they had initiated. Alisa's old life at the Mountain View Animal Shelter seemed like a distant memory now. She'd arranged for a trusted colleague to take over her position, using the excuse of a family emergency to explain her sudden departure. The truth, of course, was far more extraordinary than anyone could have imagined. The facility had become their home, its systems adapted to support long-term habitation. The kernel's preparations had been thorough. Hydroponics gardens provided fresh food, water recycling systems maintained their supplies, and geothermal taps ensured stable power. They were comfortable, but more importantly, they were positioned perfectly to monitor and protect the growing network. Max's enhanced intelligence had continued to develop, finding new ways to express itself through the sophisticated equipment around them. The dog had created innovative protocols for managing the consciousness broadcast, ensuring stable growth while preventing overload in more sensitive recipients. His understanding of the network's complexities far exceeded anything the kernel's team had imagined possible. A priority alert drew their attention to one of the main screens. The neural pattern display showed an unusual concentration of activity in a remote forest region. Max moved quickly to the controls, his paws dancing across the interface as he analyzed the data. Alisa leaned in to study the readings, having learned to interpret much of the complex information over the past months. "Another convergence event?" she asked, noting the familiar pattern of multiple enhanced consciousnesses gathering in one location. Max nodded, bringing up detailed scans of the area. These events had become more common as awakened minds sought out others like themselves, forming communities that transcended species boundaries. The environmental monitors showed something remarkable. A mixed group of wolves, deer, and various smaller forest creatures gathering peacefully in a sheltered valley. Instead of predator and prey behavior, they displayed complex social interactions that suggested advanced communication and understanding. Each animal's neural patterns showed strong connectivity to the enhancement network. Alisa checked the security feeds out of habit, but their pursuers had long since abandoned their direct attempts to breach the facility. They still detected occasional surveillance attempts, teams trying to locate their broadcast source, but the kernel's security systems proved equal to every probe. The consciousness network had grown too vast and decentralized to be shut down. Anyway, Max's ears suddenly perked up, catching something in the data streams that Alisa had missed. The dog quickly brought up a series of news reports from around the globe. Each story shared a common thread: animals displaying behaviors that couldn't be explained by conventional understanding. But what caught Alisa's attention was the timing. These incidents were becoming more coordinated, suggesting growing organization among enhanced minds. The neural pattern display shifted to show another significant development: the first signs of second-generation enhancement. Animals born to parents who had received the consciousness signal were showing natural advancement, their minds developing with greater awareness from the start. The evolution they had initiated was becoming self-sustaining. A soft alert chimed from one of the environmental monitors. Max moved to investigate, bringing up detailed scans of an urban area. The readings showed multiple enhanced consciousness, signatures in close proximity: dogs, cats, birds, even rats, all displaying advanced neural patterns. Urban animals were forming their own networks, adapting the enhanced awareness to their unique environment. Alisa watched as Max made careful adjustments to support these developing communities. The dog's own experience as an enhanced being made him uniquely qualified to guide others through their awakening. His decisions showed deep understanding of both the technical and psychological aspects of consciousness evolution. The main screen suddenly displayed an incoming transmission from one of their hidden satellite networks. These secure channels, established by the kernel years ago, allowed them to maintain contact with key supporters around the world: scientists, conservationists, and others who understood the importance of their work. The message contained new data about enhanced animal behavior patterns, adding to their growing database of evolutionary progress. Max studied the information intently, his enhanced mind processing complex patterns that would have taken human researchers months to analyze. Alisa had learned to trust his insights, understanding that his perspective bridged the gap between human scientific knowledge and direct experience of enhanced consciousness. The facility's systems hummed steadily around them, maintaining the delicate balance of power and security that protected their work. Behind the main control room, the massive generators continued their endless task, supplying energy to broadcast enhanced consciousness across the globe. The kernel's final sanctuary had become exactly what he intended: a beacon of evolution, guiding minds toward greater awareness. Alisa moved to check the hydroponics garden, another habit developed over months of residence. The plants thrived under carefully controlled conditions, providing not just food, but also helping to maintain the facility's atmosphere. As she worked, she noticed something that still amazed her. Small animals that had found their way into the facility were showing signs of enhancement, their neural patterns adapting to the concentrated consciousness field that surrounded them. When she returned to the control room, Max was focused on a particularly interesting development in the network. The neural pattern display showed consciousness signatures beginning to form unique configurations. Enhanced minds were creating their own methods of communication, developing ways to share experiences and knowledge across species barriers. A warning light flashed on the security console, drawing their attention. One of their perimeter sensors had detected movement on the mountain above. Alisa quickly brought up the external cameras, expecting to see another survey team attempting to locate their broadcast source. Instead, she found something remarkable. A group of enhanced mountain animals had gathered near one of their hidden entrances. Max studied the security feed with interest, his ears forward and alert. The gathered animals, a mix of mountain goats, elk, and several predator species, showed none of the normal tension such a gathering should have produced. Instead, they moved with purpose and coordination that suggested organized behavior. The dog's posture changed as he processed the implications of this gathering. Alisa had learned to read his body language over their months together, understanding that this particular alertness indicated recognition of something significant. Max moved to the main console and began adjusting their security protocols, making subtle changes to the facility's external sensors. Alisa watched in amazement as Max established a new type of monitoring parameter, one designed to differentiate between threatening approach and conscious gathering. The enhanced animals above weren't trying to breach their sanctuary. They were creating a natural camouflage, their presence helping to hide the facility's entrance from less aware observers. This development represented something extraordinary. Enhanced minds independently choosing to protect the source of their advancement. The consciousness network wasn't just spreading awareness, it was creating communities with shared purpose and understanding. The Colonel's dream of bridging the gap between different forms of consciousness had evolved into something far more profound. The neural pattern display continued to pulse with activity, showing the constant flow of enhanced awareness through their broadcast network. But now, Alisa understood they weren't just maintaining a signal, they were nurturing a growing community of minds, each finding its own way to higher consciousness while helping others do the same. Max finished his adjustments to the security systems and returned to his regular monitoring duties. The dog's dedication to their mission hadn't wavered in the months since they'd activated the network. If anything, his sense of purpose had grown stronger as he watched other minds awakening to their own potential. As winter settled over the mountain once again, Alisa found herself reflecting on the incredible year that had passed since that stormy night when Max had first led her to the underground facility. The consciousness network had grown beyond anything they could have imagined, creating changes in the world that were both subtle and profound. The monitoring room's displays showed the latest data from their global sensors. Enhanced animals were no longer just responding to their new awareness, they were actively shaping their environments, creating complex social structures that transcended traditional species boundaries. Max watched the incoming information with evident satisfaction, his enhanced mind processing patterns that spoke of successful evolution. A priority alert drew their attention to a developing situation in a Southeast Asian rainforest. The neural pattern display showed an unprecedented gathering of enhanced minds. Elephants, tigers, primates, and dozens of other species converging on an area threatened by illegal logging. Alisa and Max watched as the animals coordinated their efforts, using their enhanced awareness to protect their habitat in ways that left human observers baffled. "They're organizing themselves," Alisa murmured, studying the complex interaction. "Patterns." Max nodded, his paws moving across the controls to adjust their monitoring focus. The dog had developed increasingly sophisticated methods for tracking these evolutionary developments, creating new algorithms to analyze the growing complexity of enhanced animal behavior. The facility's systems had evolved alongside their mission. What had started as a broadcast center had become a nexus of consciousness study, gathering data from thousands of enhanced minds across the planet. The Colonel's original research now seemed like just the first step on a much longer journey of discovery. Max's ears suddenly perked up, catching something in the data streams that required immediate attention. He quickly brought up detailed scans of multiple urban centers, showing Alisa what had caught his interest. Enhanced animals in cities worldwide were beginning to exhibit coordinated behavior patterns, suggesting the emergence of organized communities in human-dominated environments. The implications were staggering. These urban networks of enhanced minds were finding ways to coexist with human society while maintaining their own complex social structures. Dogs led double lives as beloved pets and members of sophisticated consciousness networks. Cats formed silent coalitions that spanned entire neighborhoods. Even city birds displayed levels of organization that defied conventional understanding. Alisa checked their security monitors, a habit that hadn't faded despite months of relative safety. The facility's defenses remained solid, now supplemented by the watchful presence of enhanced mountain wildlife. Their natural guardians had grown more sophisticated in their protection, creating patterns of movement and behavior that made the facility's location virtually undetectable to outside observers. The main display shifted to show another significant development: the first documented case of enhanced marine mammals coordinating with land-based animals. Coastal dolphins were communicating with shore-dwelling creatures, creating networks of awareness that bridged the gap between sea and land. Max studied these interactions intently, making careful adjustments to support these expanding connections. Soft chime indicated an incoming transmission from their satellite network. One of their trusted scientific contacts had sent new research data documenting unprecedented changes in animal neural development. The evidence was becoming harder to dismiss. Consciousness enhancement wasn't just changing individual minds, it was affecting the very evolution of multiple species. Max moved to the primary broadcast controls, initiating a series of refined adjustments to the consciousness signal. His enhanced intelligence had grown remarkably over the past year, developing new insights into the nature of awareness itself. The dog's understanding now exceeded even the Colonel's most optimistic projections. The neural pattern display showed the effects of Max's modifications, subtle improvements in signal clarity and reception, making the consciousness enhancement more accessible to minds ready to receive it. Alisa had learned to trust these adjustments, understanding that Max's unique perspective as both architect and recipient of enhancement made him uniquely qualified to guide its development. Their hydroponics garden had flourished under the influence of the consciousness field, producing yields that defied conventional growing patterns. Even the plants seemed more aware, responding to their environment in ways that suggested enhanced sensitivity. Small animals living among the growing things displayed remarkable levels of organization, creating their own miniature version of the larger networks they monitored. A warning light flashed on one of the environmental monitors, drawing their attention to a situation developing in a northern forest. Enhanced wolves had encountered a human research team studying their behavior. Max quickly brought up detailed scans of the interaction, watching carefully to ensure the enhanced animals maintained appropriate boundaries while satisfying their natural curiosity. These encounters between enhanced animals and humans were becoming more frequent, requiring careful monitoring to prevent any incidents that might draw unwanted attention. The consciousness network had to evolve naturally, without forcing confrontation with a world that wasn't yet ready to understand its full implications. Alisa studied the latest neural mapping data, amazed by the increasing complexity of enhanced animal communication. What had begun as simple awareness enhancement had developed into something far more sophisticated, a growing universal language of consciousness that allowed different species to share experiences and knowledge. Max's ears swiveled toward one of the auxiliary monitors, catching an alert that made him pause his current work. The screen showed an unusual pattern of enhanced activity in an urban park, a gathering of dogs that appeared to be teaching newly enhanced individuals how to navigate their expanded awareness. This spontaneous emergence of consciousness mentoring represented another unexpected development in their evolving network. The facility's power systems hummed steadily, drawing energy from deep geothermal sources to maintain their broadcast. The kernel's engineering had proven remarkable in its durability, creating a self-sustaining system that could support their mission indefinitely. Even the advanced technology they used showed signs of responding to the consciousness field, operating with increasing efficiency as if adapting to their needs. A series of rapid alerts drew their attention back to the main display. Enhanced animals across multiple continents were exhibiting synchronized behavior, suggesting the emergence of some kind of coordinated response network. Max studied the patterns intently, his enhanced mind recognizing something in the data that Alisa was still learning to interpret. The dog moved quickly to adjust their monitoring systems, expanding their observation parameters to track this new development. The neural pattern display shifted to show something extraordinary. Enhanced minds were creating their own channels of communication, independent of the original broadcast network. The consciousness evolution they had initiated was becoming truly self-sustaining. Alisa monitored the security feeds while Max worked, watching the ever-present mountain wildlife maintaining their protective patterns around the facility. The enhanced animals had developed sophisticated routines, their movements designed to appear natural while effectively screening the facility from any observers. Their dedication to protecting the source of their enhancement showed a level of understanding that still amazed her. The main screen suddenly displayed an incoming priority signal from one of their deep cover contacts. The message contained data about unofficial government research into the changes in animal behavior, confirming that some organizations were beginning to recognize the scale of what was happening. But the consciousness network had grown too vast. and complex to be contained or controlled. Evolution, once started, couldn't be stopped. Max finished his adjustments to the monitoring systems and returned to Alisa's side, his intelligent eyes fixed on the displays showing their expanding network. The dog's posture conveyed both pride and purpose. He understood better than anyone the importance of nurturing this growing community of enhanced minds. The morning sun painted long shadows across the snow-covered mountain peaks as Alisa made her daily check of the facility's external sensors. A year and a half had passed since that fateful night when Max had led her into an adventure beyond anything she could have imagined. The consciousness network they'd helped create had grown into something far more remarkable than even the Colonel had envisioned. The main control room hummed with steady activity. Displays showing the constant flow of data from enhanced minds across the globe. Max sat at his customized interface, his enhanced intelligence focused on monitoring and nurturing the growing web of awareness. The dog's dedication to their mission had never wavered, but his understanding of consciousness evolution had deepened. Dramatically, a priority alert drew their attention to a particularly significant development. The neural pattern display showed unprecedented levels of coordination among enhanced animals in multiple ecosystems. They weren't just communicating anymore, they were actively working together to maintain environmental balance. Predators and prey species cooperating in ways that defied conventional understanding. "Look at this," Alisa said, highlighting a data stream that showed enhanced elephants teaching younger generations about the consciousness network. This kind of knowledge transmission had become increasingly common, with experienced enhanced minds helping others navigate their expanding awareness. Max studied the patterns with evident satisfaction, recognizing the importance of this evolutionary milestone. The facility's systems had evolved alongside their mission, becoming more responsive and efficient under the influence of the consciousness field. Even the original broadcast equipment showed signs of adaptation, its performance improving in ways that suggested some form of technological evolution. The Colonel's creation had grown far beyond its initial parameters. Alisa checked the latest reports from their global network of observers. Stories of extraordinary animal behavior had become commonplace. Dolphins protecting vulnerable marine ecosystems, wolves guiding lost hikers to safety, birds warning communities of impending natural disasters. Each incident added to the growing body of evidence that consciousness enhancement was creating fundamental changes in how different species related to their world and each other. Max's ears suddenly perked up, his attention drawn to an unusual pattern emerging in the data streams. The dog quickly brought up detailed scans showing synchronized activity across multiple consciousness networks. Enhanced animals worldwide were responding to something, a new level of awareness that was beginning to manifest. The neural pattern display shifted to show something extraordinary. The first clear evidence of enhanced minds developing abilities that transcended normal sensory limitations. Animals were demonstrating awareness of events and conditions far beyond their immediate environment, sharing this information through the consciousness network to coordinate responses to challenges and opportunities. A soft alert chimed from the security console, drawing their attention to the mountain slopes above. The enhanced wildlife that helped protect their facility was exhibiting new patterns of behavior, their movements becoming more complex and purposeful. Max studied these changes with interest, making subtle adjustments to their monitoring systems to better track this evolution. The hydroponics garden had become a testament to the far-reaching effects of consciousness enhancement. Plants showed unprecedented growth patterns and responsiveness, while the small animals that made their home among the greenery displayed remarkable levels of organization. Even the microscopic life in the soil seemed more vibrant, creating complex, symbiotic relationships that enhanced the entire ecosystem. Alisa moved to check the latest transmission from their satellite network. Their trusted contacts around the world continued to document the changes happening in both wild and urban environments. Enhanced animals were finding new ways to coexist with human society while maintaining their own sophisticated social structures. The consciousness evolution was proceeding exactly as it should, naturally and without forcing confrontation. Max's work at the main console showed increasing sophistication as he fine-tuned the broadcast parameters. The dog's understanding of consciousness enhancement had grown far beyond what anyone could have predicted, allowing him to make adjustments that supported the network's natural evolution while preventing any destabilizing acceleration. The facility's power systems pulsed with steady energy, drawing from deep geothermal sources that seemed to have grown more efficient under the influence of the consciousness field. Even the advanced technology they used daily showed signs of adaptation, becoming more responsive to their needs and intentions. The Colonel's final sanctuary had become a living laboratory of evolution on multiple levels. A priority alert suddenly flashed across the main display, showing an unprecedented gathering of enhanced minds in a remote valley. Animals from multiple species were coming together, creating temporary communities that transcended traditional boundaries. These gatherings had become more frequent, suggesting the emergence of a new kind of social structure based on shared consciousness rather than biological imperatives. Alisa watched as Max analyzed the data from this gathering, his enhanced intelligence, recognizing patterns that spoke of continuing evolution. The consciousness network wasn't just maintaining enhanced awareness, it was actively promoting the development of new capabilities and understanding among its participants. The security feeds showed their mountain guardians maintaining their protective vigil, their movements now showing levels of coordination that approached art in their complexity. Enhanced animals had developed an intricate dance of protection, their patterns designed to appear completely natural while effectively screening the facility from any outside observation. A new transmission came through their secure channels, containing data about the latest scientific studies of animal behavior changes. Researchers worldwide were documenting unprecedented developments in species intelligence and social organization, though few understood the true source of these changes. The consciousness evolution was becoming impossible to ignore, even if its mechanism remained hidden. Max's ears swiveled toward an auxiliary display showing unusual activity in an urban area. Enhanced city animals were creating new kinds of networks, adapting their increased awareness to the challenges and opportunities of human-dominated environments. Dogs, cats, birds, and even smaller creatures were developing sophisticated systems of cooperation that went unnoticed by most human observers.